In the current system, a student athlete must allow his or her university to plead the case of the student athlete to the very members at the NCAA who disagree with them. It is not rational to believe that procedures that are subject to bias can produce just and impartial decisions. When the NCAA does rule against a student athlete, the student athlete's ability to appeal their decision is flawed as well. In my own experience, I argued my appeal with the NCAA Reinstatement Appeals Committee. The NCAA states that after 1999, their way of hearing appeals changed by appointing members to hear appeals from outside their NCAA memberships. This was not the case in my appeal. The committee was made up of 5 members, all of whom had direct NCAA administrative ties. 2 were current members of the NCAA conferences, and the remaining 3 were current administrators at NCAA member institutions. I believe it is difficult to find impartiality with an appeals committee that is made up of members who have direct ties to those who previously denied relief. Secondly, NCAA Restitution Bylaw 19.7 falls far short of promoting impartiality at the court level. In brief, 19.8 states that if a student athlete is granted relief by a court, and if at any time in the future that decision is reversed by a higher court, the NCAA reserves the right not only to place sanctions on the player, but also reserves the right to impose financial as well as forfeiting penalties against the university for following the court order. In my experience, this restitution bylaw brought much concern to the judge who heard my case, as well as spurred university officials to notify me that even if I were granted injunctive relief by the court, the university would not take the risk of allowing me to play for fear of possible sanctions. In conclusion, I believe that 19.7 is against public policy, and I also believe that it does not promote due process. The NCAA has had decades to institute necessary changes to their practices and procedures. It seems like any time a congressional body of any kind suggests change to the NCAA, they always answer in a way that they are currently attempting to improve the system. But nothing ever changes. You are the only people in this country that can initiate change and oversight. And I encourage all of you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Patuto, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the subcommittee. Will only highlight a few points here and will otherwise rely on the written testimony that I submitted. As the chair indicated, I'm a professor of law at the University of Nebraska and hold a chair in constitutional law. I'm here today in my capacity as the vice chair of the Division I Committee on Infractions. The NCAA is a private association run by its member institutions through committees with separate and distinct functions that administer different NCAA bylaws. Staff from the member institutions and their conferences sit on these committees. NCAA staff do not. Jeremy Bloom describes, although not accurately, the student-athlete appeals process. That process, the infractions process, and the enforcement process are all 3 separate and distinct, with no overlap of function, membership, or even of NCAA administrative staff support. Infractions and student-athlete reinstatement decisions are appealable to separate appeals committees, again with no overlap in membership. The Infractions Committee decides cases where institutions are charged with major violations. It does not conduct investigations. It does not interview witnesses. Its decisions are based solely on the hearing record. The enforcement staff, as well as the involved institutions, coaches, and other individuals, each choose what to include in that hearing record. The committee is independent and impartial. It has 2 former judges, 1 state, 1 federal. It always has had university professors as members, currently 2 and as many as 5. Past members include law professors Charles Allen Wright, a former president of the American Law Institute and author of a multi-volume treatise on federal practice, Frank Remington, who was a member of the Supreme Court's standing committees for both civil and criminal procedure, and Jack Friedenthal, co-author of one of the most widely used civil procedure casebooks. The committee also is savvy about intercollegiate athletics. Its membership deliberately includes athletics administrators administrators. They have credibility with the member institutions because they understand the particular pressures of college athletics. That same athletics experience and background also means that they cannot be conned. The rules, investigative, and adjudicative processes are all there to assure that student athletes have equal and fair opportunities to compete. An even playing field means more than simply even-handed and consistent application of rules on the field. It also includes even-handed and consistent application of rules off the field. As directed by the member institutions, the Committee on Infractions has two critical jobs. First, to provide parties a full and fair opportunity to be heard and to treat them the same way as others charged with major violations. Second, to ensure the broader systemic interests of NCAA member institutions to assure that they are advanced. These include timely and efficient resolution of cases in a manner that faithfully applies NCAA legislation. As all 9 members of the current Supreme Court recently said, the NCAA is not a state actor. Even so, its enforcement and infractions hearing procedures meet due process standards. In fact, they parallel, if not exceed, those procedures provided by public institutions. Certainly, it is important that all NCAA processes, infractions and student-athlete reinstatement included, both be fair and be seen to be fair. The perception problem is fed in part by the natural inclination of those who suffer adverse findings and penalties to justify their conduct, sometimes by misrepresenting what they did, sometimes by misrepresenting the process itself, sometimes by doing both. As public officials, the members of this subcommittee know better than I do the potential for media reports to be inadvertently inaccurate or to create misconceptions by telling only part of the story. If there are misconceptions about the enforcement, infraction, or student-athlete reinstatement processes, the remedy lies in better communication about how these processes work and in perhaps a more discerning and less uncritical reception of descriptions by interested and disappointed parties regarding these processes, not by fixing systems that ain't broke at the risk of breaking them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ridpath?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am truly profoundly honored to be before this committee today. As a parent of young children and a former military officer, very little intimidates me, but I must admit I'm a little shaky being here, and I found out just late yesterday I needed to get from Starkville, Mississippi to Washington, D.C. and managed to pull that off with the assistance of Congressman Backus's office, and I do appreciate that. Let me start out by saying clearly I cannot disagree with Ms. Patudo more, and I think I'm going to detail that in my testimony. You have heard and will hear differing opinions through written testimony and what you've heard today on the enforcement and infractions process and the monopolizing cartel-like power of the NCAA and the NCAA National Office. There are facts and opinions on all sides of these issues, but let me address these issues from the perspective of a person who has been through 2 major infractions investigations and who is a person who once vigorously defended the very processes that Ms. Patudo just defended. But I'm also a person who has had my career and reputation ruined by this patently unconstitutional and unfair process. This is not a process that truly punishes the rule breakers. It is a process that can ruin careers and trample rights all at the same time. It is simply a process that is un-American and threatens the very foundation of higher education in America. I represent today many people who have been unfairly targeted and blamed to protect the true rule breakers. There are many scapegoats out there just so the tax-free money-making enterprise of college sports can keep running with the facade that somehow the NCAA is actually policing itself. It's an insider's game, just like the old fox guarding the henhouse, and they are getting away with it. In brief, I'm a former distinguished military graduate from the Colorado State University, and I served this country honorably for almost 12 years. I'm a man of principle and integrity. I left the stability of a distinguished military career to pursue my dream of working in college athletics. I never had my integrity, my competency, or my abilities questioned until confronted by this process and the NCAA investigators and members of the Committee on Infractions. My treatment and the treatment of others by the NCAA and the NCAA Committee on Infractions was unprofessional, it was caustic, it was adversarial, and completely out of line with any remnant of fairness, due process, and constitutional protection. My story is this. I was hired at Marshall University in 1997 as Assistant Athletic Director for Compliance. I was hired by Marshall to clean up a compliance program in disarray. I did that, and I did more. In the process of cleaning up the mess, I discovered violations that had existed in the athletic program, which I reported, as per rules, to the Mid-American Conference and the NCAA. The NCAA launched an investigation into our athletic program. One of the major violations concerned an illegal employment scheme for football and men's basketball athletes. The employment program had been going on at Marshall University for almost 7 years prior to my arrival and had been covered up by various administrators and coaches who incidentally still work in college athletics throughout. It was a scheme that I did not know or was told about. It was a cover-up. To make a long story short, I was blamed and held publicly at fault for these intentional violations committed by others in the public NCAA infractions report. I had made an inadvertent, isolated, and very minor mistake regarding athlete employment in a totally unrelated manner. While I still vehemently disagree with the NCAA's interpretation of that specific issue, it is what it is, a minor violation. Unfortunately, the NCAA investigative staff and the Committee on Infractions bootstrapped this violation, unrelated violation, in collusion with the institution to scapegoat me and blame me for violations that I had absolutely nothing to do with and that I had no power to prevent. Although I did everything required by NCAA rules, told the truth throughout the investigation, my career and reputation were in tatters, while those who actually started the program, maintained the program, and covered up the program are still working in college athletics today. What is wrong with this picture? And it's not just me. College athletics is a very seductive business that has forced good people to do bad things and bad people to do worse things. There is so much money and power involved, particularly with highly paid coaches, that many institutions will do whatever they can to protect what Ms. Batuto so eloquently calls the vital interests, and the Committee on Infractions plays a role in protecting that vital interest, but it's not fairness and due process, it's protecting the money-making machine. In short, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Thus, politically expendable individuals are often left holding the bag with literally no recourse against one of the strongest monopolies in the world. Fighting back against this un-American process has been taxing on my family. I've had to start and create a whole new professional career for myself. But I reflect back on one simple piece of advice. Do the right thing. And now the right thing is not being done, and I must do whatever I can to make changes. The NCAA is not omnipotent. They can and do make mistakes. They do have unfair and archaic practices, and there are many things that need to be done to right the ship. I truly believe that the only thing that can correct over 100 years of failed reform and change a process that continues under a shroud of secrecy that can destroy lives and careers with impunity is government intervention, and that is why I'm here today. I thank the committee for the time today, and I especially thank Congressman Backus for having the courage to pursue this important matter. I urge the committee to take whatever steps necessary to reform this process and protect those with integrity and ensure their constitutional rights are protected. I close today with a quote from a politician most of us know, former Governor Frank Keating of Oklahoma. In his resignation from the National Lay Review Board studying the recent clergy sex abuse, to suppress names of offending clerics, to deny, to obfuscate, and to explain away, that's the model of a criminal organization, not my church. Unfortunately, the NCAA is operating like this criminal organization, specifically in its enforcement and infractions process, which operates in the same way. I thank you again for the time today to tell my story, and I will submit further written documentation and statements, which I was unable to do because of the short notice. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ridpath. The members of the panel will now have 5 minutes each to ask questions. And I'll begin with, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'll begin with you, Mr. Bloom. In your written testimony, you state that you were given 10 minutes to put forth your side of the story to the NCAA's Committee on Student Athlete Reinstatement. Was this your first opportunity to speak directly to the NCAA? And if so, do you feel that you would have benefited from an opportunity to personally state your reasons for reinstatement earlier in the process? And did you attempt to speak to the NCAA on your own, and if so, what was the outcome of that?
That was my first opportunity. And back in 2002, after the Olympics, when I started this process and wanted to help the NCAA understand a different breed of two-sport athletes, I requested to have a meeting with them, speak with them. I was denied the right to meet with Mr. Brand, the president, or any of the members to speak with them directly. I had to allow the University of Colorado to represent me in my dispute with them. I believe the situation would have never gone to the court, would have never taken this long if I had the opportunity to a public hearing with the NCAA members, with an impartial governing body making its decision.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Patuto, would you please share with us your views on the Lee Committee recommendations and whether the NCAA's membership has gone far enough in adopting those recommendations?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The Lee Commission had a number of recommendations, most of which were adopted by the NCAA member institutions. In fact, the particular proposal for an independent hearing officer was also adopted by the member institutions. Having said that, in the several years in which that particular option was available to member institutions and individuals, it was only requested once by an individual, and in that instance, the institution opposed the use of a hearing officer. As I said in my opening remarks, it is critical to the process to have people adjudicating cases who know what happens behind the scenes, can understand a proposed penalty that in fact isn't a penalty, can appreciate and give credibility because they've been there. It's not a situation in which it's a body where no one has walked a mile in the shoes of the people who appear before it.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ridpath, taking into consideration the testimony that you gave us just a few moments ago, what suggestions would you recommend for changing the process to make it fairer, both the institutions, but especially the student athletes and the coaches and everybody involved?
I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman. There are several. I recently wrote a letter to the editor to the NCAA News suggesting some, I think, needed improvements. One is one that's been discussed today, and that is opening up the infractions and hearings process to the public, making those hearing transcripts public, letting the media participate in that. Do not do something behind closed doors. It's a shroud of secrecy that just makes it appear like something wrong is going on. That's the big thing. I also do feel that the Committee on Infractions, although Ms. Patuto has eloquently stated that she feels it's a fair and impartial jury, that is not the case. There are athletic directors on that committee. There are faculty athletic reps. They get perks for being part of that committee. They know several of the people that they sometimes are even investigating or adjudicating. And these individuals, they have used this bully pulpit to sometimes settle old scores or cash chips in. I know that for a fact. I state my number two after public hearing is an independent Committee on Infractions, not anybody from member institutions. I respect the fact they have people like Frederick Lacey on the committee, but that does not take away the conflict of interest. The other thing is everybody who's involved in an NCAA investigation, I use my situation as a clear example, need due process and their constitutional rights protected. That if an institution makes someone a corrective action for some woebegone reason, that the NCAA needs to know if they're as experienced as Ms. Patuto is claiming, I do dispute that, to know what really goes on behind closed doors and know that they are scapegoating the lowest common denominator. They do not have to accept that as a corrective action. The fact that they do, they are as complicit in the false policies of this committee. Those are really three initial ones that I can think of, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and my time has expired. Is the gentleman from New York here? I guess he's in the back. Okay. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had an inquiry, Ms. Patuto, about a scheduling for preseason games. Did the NCAA make a decision on preseason games, especially affecting Hispanic universities?
Congressman, the NCAA National Office could answer that question. The Committee on Infractions doesn't deal with that, and anything I'd say would be from what I would get from the public record also. So I do think that one needs to be there. People here from the NCAA could either address that for you now or after the hearing.
Thank you. If I guess the problem with this whole subject is if there's a disagreement, who gets to make the final decision? And we've heard Mr. Ridpath refer to it as a cartel. A lot of the Little League and all kinds of leagues have a commissioner who has final authority on everything, and his decision is final, and that's it, and that's everybody's agreed to that process. Should schools, Mr. Ridpath, should schools be able to agree